Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Noelle and in this video I'll be sharing insights into this sea art watercolor painting. Instead of touching on every aspect of this piece, I'm hoping to cover the main elements that, in my opinion, may be most interesting to you. I plan to discuss my paint choices and my painting process for the rock and water textures. For this piece, I chose to use some paints that I don't normally work with, which were alizarin crimson, raw sienna, and azo orange. Ultramarine blue is also a newer addition to my regular palette. Some people may consider these paints staples in their paint palettes, but I usually prefer the brighter version of each paint. For example, I usually grab Pyrrole Red or Pyrrole Scarlet instead of alizarin crimson, and instead of ultramarine blue, I would usually grab phthalo blue or Prussian blue because I am avoiding unwanted granulation. As a side note, my M-gram ultramarine blue is actually less granulating than other brands made with the same pigment, so for me it is a great option when I'm looking for a smooth wash. In my public and personal art explorations, I usually use my Daniel Smith or Magello Mission Gold watercolor paints. It surprised me to find that the few paints I had in my M-gram collection really suited this piece. Most of my M-gram tubes are from their Marinescape set, which is very fitting for this piece and completely unintentional. On the topic of earth tones, like M-gram's raw sienna, I really don't have very many of them. A lot of my paintings depict skies and greenery, so when I come around to needing an earth tone for my piece, I will just mix it with the colors I'm already using. The only earth tones I own were either gifted to me or were part of a set I purchased. I've never sought out earth tones in individual tubes or pans. After using a lot of raw sienna in this piece, I'm curious about using these colors more frequently, especially in mixes to tone down brighter colors and add warmth. As I conclude painting the sky, you may have caught that I used ultramarine blue and phthalo blue for my sky mixture, so now that we are moving on to painting the rocks, I would like to share how these color mixes were thought out carefully. In the beginning of this video, I showed you the practice paintings and sketches I made to prepare for my final painting. The subtle red, orange, and purple tones in the rocks were very important for me to get right. The warm colors were largely varying amounts of raw sienna and alizarin crimson, while the purple tones were a combination of the sky mixture with alizarin crimson and a little raw sienna. Moving on to the rocks, I composed my first layer to be painted in large washes so the colors could softly blend. My practice sketches helped me observe that the rocks closest to the water had a purplish hue that faded from red into raw sienna at the top. I left some irregular white areas exposed by randomly moving my pigmented brush across the paper lightly and quickly. A drier brush works best for this technique compared to a brush fully loaded with water. While the paint was still wet, I would dab spots of paint to add more color in areas that I felt needed it. Finer details in a wash are best painted after the surface has had a chance to dry a little bit. Less water on the page means the paint will travel a shorter distance when it is applied. Eventually, azo orange was brought in to depict some interesting orange areas on the rocks. I felt like this saturated color made this area pop since it complements well with the sky and water. this moment, I realized that I painted over a spot by accident. When this happens, I quickly grab a paper towel and dab it with pressure. I know that I removed more paint than I needed to, but this made it easier to see where my pencil lines were, and it was no trouble repainting that area. I was intrigued to paint this piece specifically because I wanted to get some practice painting rocks. Rocks are easy to depict because their shapes are largely irregular and random, but like clouds, there are still patterns to follow so the image can appear unified. The shadows and 3D shapes need to make sense. If it confuses the viewer, it feels awkward. Looking back at my preliminary sketches, the number of doodles seems a bit excessive, but at the time I was really trying to find a balanced composition while familiarizing myself with the types of shapes and edges found in this rock formation. I noticed that there were a lot of sharp, jagged edges compared to the round rocks found in rivers. I already talked about the variation of local color on the rocks, but I also had to understand what color the shadows needed to be, a dark bluish purple. This piece is really just a rock study. I was learning how to paint rocks. In addition, I also spent a lot of time finding the right balance of contrast for this piece. When I converted my reference photo to grayscale on my computer, I noticed that aside from the shadows, the sky, water, and rocks were all similar in value. This was good information to have because I was able to practice adjusting the values of it in my sketchbook before I started this painting. Looking back at this video footage now, it is fun to watch how much the piece changes when the dark brushstrokes are added. Another detail that I want to note is that the underpainting for the shadows was just a guide to help me know where to paint, since the pencil marks were becoming hard to see. Right here, I was comparing my small practice piece to my larger painting. I liked how the sky was more vibrant in my practice piece, so I begrudgingly decided to paint another layer of blue paint onto the sky to make it a bit darker. I really wanted the lightest areas on the rocks to contrast with its background, and I'm glad that I did it, but it was a tough choice at the time. The process for painting the water from my viewpoint is simple. I started with a flat wash and later added short horizontal strokes. I will get into more detail about this a little later, but the main goal for this step was to establish the lightest values in the water before adding the second layer after it dries. Considering my experience from 2 videos ago, the process for this painting felt a lot smoother. In comparison, I was a lot more prepared this time because I learned a thing or two about preparation. I solved most of my painting problems before I even started my larger piece. For my Edmund's Fairy painting, I was frustrated because I chose to repaint my large piece that I had spent a lot of time on, but in a way, that painting was similar to the practices that I did for the painting in this video. just bigger and unexpected. Returning to the water, this step demonstrated that the short horizontal strokes of paint I mentioned earlier. Some of these strokes connect and touch each other, and as a result, I can create the illusion of water in my painting. Because the water surface reflects light, I can expect that the color of the water resembles the area above it, as if it were a bumpy funhouse mirror. The water in my reference photo is calm, so I am able to roughly follow the silhouette of the arch above it and paint it similarly below. Maybe one day I will dive into the optical physics of this more, but for now, this is the basic idea. So, on another topic, I found the reference photo for this piece randomly on the website Paint My Photo. I knew nothing about where this picture was taken or what it was called. I just thought it was a pretty picture and I wanted to practice painting rocks. So while editing this video, I did a reverse image search of my reference and found that this arch stood along Lake Superior at Tennessee State Park in Missouri and had collapsed in 2010. In 2019, the remaining sea stack fell in a storm. I was disappointed to learn this because this is a beautiful rock formation, but it is a little funny because I had thought about how this rock structure seemed fragile while I was painting it. I had no idea it didn't exist anymore. In conclusion, I'm very happy with how my painting turned out. I learned a lot and it was nice to try something a little different. Hopefully you learned something too. If you enjoyed watching, consider purchasing an art print, liking this video, or subscribing to my channel. All my supplies and information are linked below. I also love answering questions in the comments, and thank you so much for watching.